Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to Advocacy in Action, where we take a closer look at real world topics that impact political engagement. I'm your host, Brittney Hanks, and today we're diving into a topic that continues to make waves across the country: redistricting. I'm joined by our longtime friend and political analyst, Jim Ellis. Jim, as always, it's great to have you here.
Well, always my pleasure, Brittany. It's good to see you.
Jim has been closely tracking the ongoing redistricting developments across the state, so today we're getting his expert insight into what's happening, where it matters most, and what it could all mean heading into 2026 and beyond. Before we begin, I want to note that this episode is being recorded on November 12th, 2025, and as we all know, the landscape changes quickly. Depending on when you're watching, be sure to check reliable, up-to-date sources for the latest developments. So, redistricting might sound like something that only happens once every 10 years after the census, but as Jim can tell us, court challenges and new maps have made this process active well into the current cycle. These changes can directly impact who represents us in the balance of power in Congress, which is why it's so important for anyone involved in government affairs to keep an eye on what's happening. So, Jim, let's start with a big picture view. Can you give us a quick overview of where things stand nationally with redistricting right now, and how many maps are still in play, and what's driving the latest activity?
Certainly, Brittany. Thanks for having me. Let's start with really sort of the beginning of all this, what we would call the mid-decade redistricting. And in all honesty, I think the Supreme Court is largely to blame for this because they've not given the states real clear direction on how to draw these lines. And it all relates around the minority districts. And there is a big conflict that the states have to deal with. And, most people think, well, it's just these partisan gerrymanders and it's easy to do when they draw these crazy looking districts. It's a very complicated process. And all the states have a lot of criteria they have to meet when they draw these lines. And first of all, the conflict on the minority districts, and this is what causes most of the problems and why we see so many new maps being done. The conflict is this: the change between the Voting Rights Act and what the Voting Rights Act of 1965 says and the U.S. Constitution. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 created what we would call these protected majority minority districts. So when a district establishes itself as what we would call majority minority, where one minority group has a majority of the population, and therefore in a primary can get the candidate of their choice to win the general election. That district then becomes what we call a protected minority seat. And remember, this was done in 1965, so things have changed greatly since then. And that seat then must be protected in future redistrictings. That's what it means on the protected seat. But the U.S. Constitution says that race cannot be a factor in drawing congressional districts. So on one hand, you've got to protect minority-based districts. On the other hand, you can't draw based on race. That's the conflict. And the Supreme Court just simply has not given the states clear direction on what to do and how to resolve this conflict. It's sort of like, well, you have to protect these districts, but you can't say you're doing it. And that's why these states have, they're really in a dilemma. Now, the court may finally give us a clear direction with the Louisiana racial gerrymandering case that is before them right now. And they were supposed to rule on this case in June. They did not. They wanted to have further hearings on that, further arguments. That occurred on October 15th. We're now waiting for the ruling. This could be a landmark ruling. And if so, it would give the states the proper direction they need. So that's sort of the background. Now, the background on the current redistricting and why we've kicked up to a whole new level here in the mid-decade is started in the state of Texas. And there's a big misnomer here because it's been viewed by the media and portrayed in the media as this Republican power grab. But there's a legal reason that map had to be redrawn. There was a local county commissioner case in Galveston County, Texas, and they ruled that the composition of the minority districts in that county was illegal. And so therefore, and then it went to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, the interesting thing here is that this was an en banc ruling. And that means that every judge in that Fifth Circuit took part in this case. And they all upheld that lower court decision that said these districts were illegal. The Justice Department then, based on that ruling, informed the state of Texas, the governor and the secretary of state, that you have illegal congressional districts that have to be redrawn. Therefore, that's why the redistricting was launched. Now, did the Republicans take advantage of that and change it into a power grab? Absolutely, yes. And so that's where the ball started rolling. Then the other state that legally has to redraw and just have completed the process is Ohio, because Ohio had a process where a unique law. They have a redistricting commission, but it's made up of elected officials, including the governor. And if they get a unanimous vote on a map, then that map is law. If they don't, it goes to the legislature. But the legislature has to pass it by 3/5 vote in each house. If they don't, then the maps passed by a majority, a simple majority, then can only stand for 2 elections. Well, all that happened in 2021. So therefore, the Ohio map had to be redrawn because that map could only stand legally under state law in 2022 and 2024. So that's where everything began. But there were legal reasons that don't get covered as to why this all started. Then, of course, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, says, well, if Texas is picking up 5 seats, then we're going to redistrict California and neutralize that and get 5 seats of our own. So that's what they did, but they had a redistricting commission, so they had to figure out a way to get beyond that. So he goes to the legislature, gets 2/3 vote to put a referendum in a special election. They passed the referendum, so that's where we are now in California. And then all these other states then started joining. Well, if he's redistricting, I'm going to redistrict, and boom, boom, boom. So we've got a dozen states now that have considered or are moving forward or have completed redistricting, as you see on the map of the universe of states. And then we see where those states where it isn't happening. And then the next slide will show you has the states where it is serious. And we've already had several states complete the process now: Texas, California, Missouri, and North Carolina. Now Ohio, they've already got new maps, so they're done. And now Utah. We're on November 12th here. Just this morning, it was announced that the Utah situation has now been resolved. And what happened there is there was a voter initiative that the people voted in some different criteria for redrawing districts. And the legislature, a judge ruled earlier this year that the legislature just ignored those criteria when they drew the current map. So that map was disqualified and went to the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court there, and they agreed. So the Utah map had to be redrawn. A new one was just accepted by the court. And so now Utah joins the completed districts in the country, and that'll give the Democrats 1 seat there. So it continues to evolve. Things have really kind of spun out of control. And, we see on these further maps, we could just sort of give you the extremes on what would happen to both sides. Now, the first map is the Republican map that would show a 9-seat gain if everything broke the Republicans' way. And it's not now because the California map did pass. So if you look at the next slide, shows you what would happen if the Democrats got everything they wanted, and they would gain potentially 6 seats, and that would be enough to really take the majority by a seat or 2 without even having an election. Or you would have elections, but these maps will work as they're designed. And but the realistic map is the next slide, and I think that's probably Republicans +2. And what's really got going, when this engine really started towards redistricting, the Republicans thought they might be able to net 14 seats. That isn't going to happen. It looks like they'll get maybe 2 or 3 advantage, but with an advantage of 5. Right, it'll end up being 220 to 215 when these special elections are done. But that really only means the Democrats need to convert 3 seats to get the majority from 215 to 218. So when you add a couple, 3 more, I mean, that could be the difference in terms of deciding the outcome of the House majority in the 2026 elections. So that's kind of a long explanation of where we are and where we stand here. But we
No,
really still
that's
have a long way to go.
yeah, no, that's a really, really helpful context. It just feels like every time one case gets resolved, another challenge pops up, and it's just going to continue. Let's get into just a few of the
Although, Brittney, I do
specifics.
want to talk about my favorite one through this whole uh, process where we see, well, this state redistricting said we're going to. My favorite was the governor of Massachusetts, Maura Healey, who came out and said, well, we'll redistrict in the Massachusetts as well. But then she had to be reminded, well, Governor, the Democrats already have all 9 seats in the Massachusetts delegation. So they're, they wouldn't gain anything by doing that. So I found that quite amusing that the governor didn't even realize how many Democrats she had in the congressional delegation. So
Oh, that's very funny. I love that. I know that you talked about some of the recent things that have been going on, including a new update just this morning. Is there any other big redistricting developments or court decisions in the past few months that people
yes,
really need to know about that you kind of want to focus on?
the real big one is what the Supreme Court does on this Louisiana case, because this could affect states that aren't even talking about redistricting. This could be the landmark decision that the states have been waiting for an awful long time. Now, there's no guarantee, especially with this court, because they don't ever seem to go the all the way on these decisions. It's always these little piecemeal decisions that this court seems to render. And that's been part of the problem, as I mentioned, with redistricting, because they just aren't clear with the direction. So there is hope that the reason they postponed this Louisiana case, which seems to be an easy ruling, that they didn't uphold the lower court, but maybe they're trying to set the real parameters on what will happen in the future. If they do, and it depends on when too, because we're waiting for the ruling. So we have primaries starting to come up, candidate filing deadlines. Illinois has already filed. We go to March primaries in several states. March 3rd, we've got Texas, North Carolina. So these maps need to be done to give candidates a chance to prepare a campaign and run, know at least where they're running if they want to run for Congress. But the Supreme Court tends not to really care too much about that. And so we could see primaries being postponed. In fact, Louisiana has already postponed their primary just to give them a little more time. But it will definitely affect Louisiana. And I think it definitely affects Alabama, because Alabama and Louisiana are in the same situation with regards to this minority district question. So if they rule that Louisiana's map is illegal, the Alabama map is too then. So we could see that happen, but they've got to make primary. So maybe they don't get it done until 2028 because the court won't give them the time. So it's very complicated, but other states could get thrown in. And Louisiana, the Louisiana map, if they rule and uphold what the lower 3-judge federal panel has already said, then the Texas map for the Republicans will be safe. If they
Got it.
change that ruling, then the Texas map could be in jeopardy. So there's just a lot of there's a lot of moving parts here that really we need to see some decisions, but we aren't coming anytime soon.
Right. Yeah, it seems like it has such a ripple effect to every decision that's made. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. So speaking of those states, are there any other like what are the other biggest redistricting battlegrounds and what makes them so pivotal? Like anything beyond Louisiana that people really need to be tracking?
The states where you can see multiple seats switch, there's 2 that right come to mind. Florida, which the Republican legislature says they will take up when they come back in session in early January. Their primary is not till August, so they still have time to do that. And the Republicans think they can maybe gain 2 seats on a new Florida map. That's going to be pushing it, but these states are really pushing the extreme. I mean, the California map, for example, there's 52 seats. This map suggests that the Republicans will only have 4 out of the 52. Um, I'm not sure it plays out that way, and I'm not sure the Texas map actually gives 5 to the Republicans at the end of the day either. So we'll see how the elections go. But I think a couple of those seats in both states, these new ones are really competitive. So either side could win those. But Florida and Indiana, I think, are the two that need to be watched. Florida, they could gain 2 seats, and in Louisiana, excuse me, Indiana, the the legislature has been hesitant to do it. The governor called them into special session for several issues, including redistricting. They decided just to postpone that to the regular session now. And but the Indiana leadership on the Republican side has been hesitant to redraw. But there's talk and there's a way. They say Indiana has 9 seats. The Republicans currently have 7, and they think they can draw a 9-0 map like some of the other states have, like Massachusetts, for example, with 9-0 Democrats. So those 2 states, I think, become pivotal. Wisconsin, was supposed to start this whole thing with redistricting and cost the Republicans 2 seats. And it was almost a foregone conclusion at the beginning of this year that the Supreme Court would order a new map, but they didn't, which was a surprise considering 2 of the justices actually campaigned on doing that very thing, but they decided not to do that. Part of the reason was apparently that the legal experts thought, well, these judges would have to recuse themselves if they campaigned on a particular issue and then it comes before them. And that would have thrown the majority to the Republicans on the court.
Yeah.
So they didn't redraw Wisconsin. Illinois is talking about it, but I can't see that they would really risk things. There are 17 seats in Illinois. The Democrats already have 14 of those. It's hard to see the Republicans having less than 3. And if they do, here's the problem with trying to do that. You endanger some of your own incumbents when you do those types of extreme maps. That could be the case with the Republicans in Indiana or Florida as well. So I would say those states are the ones to look at. Maryland, they keep going back and forth as to whether they're going to try to draw an 8-0 map there. The Democrats currently have 7 of the 8 seats. The governor is open to doing it, but the state Senate president says we're not doing it. So they're in a bit of a stalemate right now. So we'll see if they can strong arm the state Senate president to actually redraw the map. So there's still a lot of moving parts here, and there's going to be a lot more if the Louisiana case turns out to be a landmark decision.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's fascinating to see how a few district lines can really shift the whole political balance so dramatically. Are there any
it does,
states?
once the maps are drawn, that first election, they usually work exactly as drawn. But as time progresses and the districts begin to change with people moving and the demographics change and the composition of the population changes, then the redistricting maps aren't as important as the decade progresses. But nowadays, we don't ever have a map standing for more than 1 or 2 elections. So they'll be working pretty well. These new maps, I predict, will work very well for the party that drew them.
Got it. Are there any states where new or proposed maps can lead to an unexpected outcome, like flipping a seat or creating new competitive districts that hadn't previously been competitive?
There could be. Now, the Texas map is a good example of that, where they've done a pretty good job of protecting all of their incumbents. Texas has 38 seats, and 25 of them are Republican. And the thing about this new map is that they've protected all 25 Republican incumbents. And still they think they can get 5 seats, which is, I think, going to be a stretch. And it is predicated on the Republican congressional candidates doing as well or close to how President Trump did among the Hispanic vote in South Texas that he did in 2024. And I'm not sure that's going to translate that way. These districts in the South Texas are 75 to 85% Hispanic. Republicans are now carrying those. And so this is a huge change. And it's not just because of the border. It's more because of the economy. It's more because of the energy issues there. The Green New Deal was very unpopular there because it was costing people energy-related jobs in the oil and gas industry. And so all that coming together has really allowed the Republicans to flip almost all the South Texas districts. And they anticipate doing so in this election, with the exception of the El Paso seat. And that's a huge wave. But we might be a long way from that. I mean, that's still a pretty big step, and you've got some new incumbents there that the Republicans need to protect. So it may be a stretch to say they'll gain an extra 5 seats there. So
Yeah, for sure. No, it's interesting how those kind of shifts can show how it can reshape the playing field, even for those incumbents that have probably felt really safe in the past. From your perspective, how could you see redistricting changes shape the fight for control for the US House going into 2026?
oh, I think it's major. I think the party that wins the redistricting battles probably has a pretty good chance of winning the House. I think it's going to be a small majority either way. Most people now think, and particularly when you look at the New Jersey, Virginia, and New York City elections that occurred here on November the 4th, that was huge Democratic landslide. So there's, oh, okay, well, it looks like now the House will flip to the Democrats. We saw the same thing in 2024. These same people predicted that in 2024 as well, and it didn't happen. So I think we're a long way from that. I think the only thing that we can really be guaranteed of is that we'll have another very tight U.S. House one way or the other.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely been really narrow lately, so I'm sure this is going to have a big impact. My final question is looking further ahead, how do you expect redistricting and related court battles to evolve as we move toward the 2030 census and that whole full redistricting cycle?
We're going to see another round of battles here, particularly if the Republicans move forward, and they are, with changing how the census is done. And if you thought the Democrats screamed about redistricting, wait till they get a load of it. That's because what the census is they're talking about doing is, first of all, non-citizens are counted in the census for apportionment and redistricting purposes. And the other thing that is so important about the census is that's what's used to determine how to send money to the states based on the number of people. This is why the Democrats have a problem in these states where they're losing population, like California, like Illinois, like New York. And this is why they fight so hard on this immigration issue, because they certainly want more of these people in these districts because they're losing people. I mean, that's really not happened before, where a state not only doesn't keep up with the rate of growth, but they're actually losing population.
Right.
And in the last census here, the 2020 census, we had 3 states that had fewer people than they did in 2010. And that was West Virginia, Illinois, and Mississippi. But Mississippi was by only 2,500 people, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But what happens then when you add in where they should be on the rate of growth, that's where they're going to lose tremendous numbers of seats. I mean, California is going to lose 3 or 4 seats, apparently. New York could lose 2. Illinois could lose 2 if these trends continue. Now, that's a big deal, and that affects not only the U.S. House, but it affects the Electoral College, too. So that's why this is a huge fight.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just really hard to believe that the next census is like already on our horizon. But
Well, we're
you're
already
right.
midway through the decade, so yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think those patterns are really going to give us a glimpse of what to expect for that next decade.
Yes.
Well, Jim, thank you as always for sharing your insight. It's clear that redistricting isn't just a once a decade event. It's going to be an ongoing process that continues to shape our political
It's
landscape.
it's full time now.
Yes, yes, it is. For our viewers, if you like this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, share it with your networks. You can also check out our other advocacy and action episodes. We've built a great on demand library covering everything from elections to advocacy best practices. And if you're interested, you can even sponsor an upcoming episode. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.